When I met you in Chicago at the DNC, I was just absolutely in awe at the work that you've done for us, for our community, and that you continue to do. So just thank you so much. Um,
Thank you.
to start off, just to get right into it, Ms. Abrams, you had a video go viral, an interview that went viral of yours, where you were breaking down the steps to autocracy and authoritarianism. I know I watched it several times myself, and it went viral. And I would love for you to just kind of expound upon that here, as well as the way in which we see those practices unraveling here in America right now. And the most important question that I would then argue is, how do we defend against that right now?
Sure. So I'm going to start with an important level setting, which is you got to call me Stacey going forward.
Okay. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Okay. Because if we're going to be in this fight together, we got to be able to call each other by our names.
Yes, ma'am.
And the 10 steps are pretty straightforward, but I think it's so critical that first people be able to recognize what's happening. It's very easy. In fact, it's the intention of autocrats and authoritarians to have us confused by the chaos. That's strategy, it's not an afterthought. But it's also important for us to think of it as an individualized harm. As long as we think it's just happening to us or it's just something we see, we don't create solidarity, we don't work together. And so part of the reason for the 10 steps is to give people the language to use and the filter. When you see this, this is part of what they're doing to you. And they're not just doing it to you, they're doing to everyone. So the 10 steps are these. One, there's an election, and we need to understand that elections are how they get into power these days. But it's usually going to be the last free and fair election we see. Number two, the executive expands power, and it's usually a man. And that's what we're watching with these executive orders that come out every single week that take on more and more authority that's not actually legal. But we've got to understand that it's not about what they can do, it's what they tell us they can do. And so we've got to pay attention. That the fact that someone says, I have the right to take your house does not mean they have the right to take your house. Step three is that they weaken competing powers. They get those powers to either give up their authority or they take authority. In a lot of countries, you've seen the strong men take authority. Unfortunately, in the US, the people who have the ability to fight back have given their power up. So we've seen Congress do that on that mega bill. We saw senators say, I know this is the wrong thing to do for my people, but I'm going to vote this way anyway because I'm afraid of losing my job. That's step three. But it's also the Supreme Court just today saying that racial profiling in the United States is now permissible if it means that you can take people off the streets, abduct them. So instead of stop and frisk, we've now got stop and abduct. And the Supreme Court has given away its authority and said that can happen. Step four, you break government so it doesn't work for anyone. You make it so that people can't find a reason to fight for democracy. And the reason we have democracy, I'm a champion of democracy, but democracy is a practical decision. We believe in democracy because it's how we get to have a vote and a voice. And if you can make government not work, it's easy to convince people that it's not worth it. That's so important because it's how they get the disadvantaged and the disgruntled and the despairing to just abandon their beliefs. So you eliminate the Department of Education. And on the state level, you decide you don't have to have vaccines in the state of Florida. Because when children start to get sick, they're not going to remember that it was because you had an authoritarian regime, starting with Secretary of Health and Human Services Robert Kennedy, that said vaccines don't work. They're just going to know their children are in danger. And then they're going to say it's a terrible thing for the entire system. And so we've got to make sure we keep connecting the dots, that when our kids go hungry this year because they've cut benefits for feeding children in schools, we got to call that out because that's them breaking democracy. Step five is that you install loyalists. We see that happening when they're going after Lisa Cook, the Federal Reserve Governor. You've got the head of the Federal Home Housing Loan Association. I'm sorry, the Federal Home Financing Association. Who in the country knew who Bill Pulte was? But he's a loyalist who's using his access to your mortgage records to go after the central bank. You've got Kash Patel, who's going after the enemies of Donald Trump and people he doesn't like. But what you do is you put people in place who are loyal to the authoritarian, not to the Constitution, and certainly not to America. Step six, you go after the press. And it's why the work you're doing is so critical because we have to have voices that are telling the truth because they are trying to quash those voices and replace everything with propaganda. And that's why citizen journalism, citizen commentating is so critical. It's why I wanted to be with you today, because you can reach people and remind them of the truth. Because the reason you go after the media, the reason you defund public broadcasting is because if public broadcasting is telling the truth, then people might think they are entitled to more. Step 7, they go after DEI. They go after the vulnerable, the dispossessed, the disadvantaged, the marginalized. In the United States, we call that DEI. They're not mad because black kids went to Harvard. They're mad that black kids got educated. They're mad that women are making enough money to make decisions about how they want to use their lives and use their bodies. They're angry that the disabled have been able to fully immerse themselves in society and that they've gotten too close. They're upset with all of those communities that they thought they could scapegoat. It's why they are kidnapping immigrants and taking them out of our communities. It's the reason that the most prolific executive orders were anti-DEI, because they are terrified that this nation actually works the way we said it was going to work, because DEI is in our DNA. Step 8 is that they will then unfortunately go after our friends. They go after civil society. That's why they're going after Act Blue and Indivisible and anyone who's doing the work of actually organizing people. It's why they're suing universities. Because if you can break what people know and you can take the people who will defend them and you can make protests feel like it's dangerous, people will stop talking. Step 9, unfortunately, is what we're seeing happen in LA and in DC and what they're threatening to do in Chicago. It's when you militarize our communities to incentivize violence. When people think that violence is the answer to the questions, and when the people asking the questions and doing the violence are the people who should be protecting you, silence is easier than speaking up.
Right.
And that gets us to step 10. And step 10 is when they start to break democracy so it never works again. That's why Texas is redrawing their lines. It's why in Missouri, you've got these young people who are holding the floor, but you've got an entire state fighting back against maps, where the U.S. senator from that state gave a speech this past week saying that he believes that the only people who deserve to be here
Mhm.
are not immigrants, not black people. He believes in this Christian nationalism that is dangerous. And they break democracy by purging voters in Georgia, by changing the rules in Texas and in Florida, by going after voters in Ohio. When they can make it hard for us to vote, they make it nearly impossible for us to create change. But it's not impossible. And that's what we have to believe, that the 10 steps to autocracy and to authoritarianism can be fought back when we decide that we deserve the country we want to build.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that thoughtful answer and that explanation. And I feel like I resonate so much with what you've been talking about and so deeply with the work that you are doing, especially as you break it down in a way that people can digest and understand that it is intentional. It is a deliberate attack on our liberties and on our rights, and it is to dissuade us from getting involved. It
Exactly.
is. So along that same line too, you mentioned apathy, or this thread of trying to instill this idea that things cannot change or things cannot be better. And I'm a member of Gen Z, and as a member of Gen Z, as we become more politically involved, and I mean standing on the shoulders of those who came before us, people who have paved the way like yourself for us to go into this work, how do you see us reshaping the landscape of civic engagement to specifically combat apathy and disillusionment?
So I actually don't believe that very many people are apathetic. It's a term we use because it exempts us from responsibility. And I think it's your generation that understands this most. It's not that you don't care, it's that you don't believe. Apathy says you don't care anymore. You are immune to whether it's good or bad. But I think what's actually true is that this is a generation that has experienced such dramatic despair
Mhm.
that it's hard to believe that it can work. And that's why voices like yours are so important. That's why recognizing the 10 steps are so important, because the antidote is our action. We've got to prove that democracy can deliver. We've got to prove that no matter how mean they are, we can still do the work. And it's the kind of work that you're galvanizing. There's a lot of intention about let's do these big, massive things. Let's win an election. Elections are important. I believe that. Having not won a couple myself, I can tell you elections matter. But what matters as much is having Gen Z show up at the schools they recently graduated from and support those teachers and those educators, knowing that kids are going to start going hungry, that 18 million children will lose food and will go home on Fridays and probably not eat again till Monday. This is the generation that can organize backpacks and fill them with food and hand them out at schools, knowing that we've got communities that are going to lose access to healthcare services. Let's organize clinics and find out how we can connect people to the health services they need. What this generation can do more than anything is to, number one, disrupt this idea that you don't care by showing up. Number two, you can deny them their power by actually using yours. And third, you can organize to show that the work that it's being done doesn't require millions of dollars or millions of people saying yes. You all are the largest generation. When you and the millennials connect, you guys can run the table. And you are the most educated, the most connected generation in human history. Your power is so incredible, but we don't have to make it look like the sort of grand cinematic moments of the Avengers. Sometimes it's those small individual actions that, when linked together, remind people that you don't have to despair because before we had money, before we had power, we had each other. And your generation is the one to remind us that that's true.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. And on that same vein as well, I've heard from people because I try my best to engage with the community that I have. I talk a lot about building a community of unity amongst people. And I've heard people be reluctant to going into politics, to getting involved at all out of the fear that if they were to go into politics, politics would change them rather than them changing it. So I would love your personal experience being in the political realm and being in the political field for as long as you have. How do you not become dismayed by the division? How do you maintain that hope and that drive to continue pushing forward, even in the face of what many would consider unable to even overcome an opposition of that magnitude?
So one, I grew up in the South.
Hey, yes,
So
ma'am.
like that's boot camp of the first order.
Right, right.
And so the first job was that before I stood for public office, I ran for the state legislature. I think I was 27 when I ran. I wrote myself a memo
Mm,
telling myself what I believed because the way they change you is by creating an amnesia of why you got there.
ooh,
So I
yes.
wrote a memo to myself and I said, these are the things I believe. And I realized I don't believe in as many things as I would say, oh, I believe that. No, because belief means I'm willing to put that into writing and put it into law. There are a lot of things I like. There are a lot of things I think are true. But belief means I'm willing to impose that on someone else. But when you know what those beliefs are, then they become hard for you to waver from. I believe poverty is immoral. I will never vote on a piece of legislation. I will never take an action that will increase someone else's poverty. That made it easier for me when I was in the legislature to make decisions because I had that North Star. So that's the first job. The second was that I believe in alignment, not agreement.
Mm,
A lot of us are so righteous that we need people to do what we do because they believe what we believe. Society doesn't work like that. Families don't work like that.
right.
And so instead, we go with alignment. Alignment means we want the same outcome, but not for the same reason. And when that's your approach in politics, it's an easier way to navigate, not because you're doing less or you're compromising your values. It's because you don't let your vision overwhelm your ability to get there. Perfection sounds great. It feels great. It is rarely achieved. And so I focus on how do I align my intentions with yours, but I don't ever compromise my values. And because I know what I believe, I know what those are. And then the third is that we got to get good at winning and losing.
Mm,
And sometimes we don't fight because we don't think we can win. I believe that progress is winning because when you move from point A to point B, you're no longer at A. Now, you might have been shooting for Z,
right.
but as long as you can stay in the fight, that's the work.
Mm,
We keep thinking that because we made progress, the other side is losing. No, they're making progress in different ways. The question isn't who's making progress, it's who gets to the goal first. And so our responsibility is to keep pushing, especially your generation, because you all can see clearly. You have the benefit of what Gen X, which is my generation, what we did or didn't do, what the boomers did or didn't do, what millennials wanted to do and haven't quite gotten to. You know what we know, but you can do even more with who you are.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I've often heard that now our society has become more devoid of compassion and empathy. And in what may describe as an era of unprecedented division, you have people who, like you said, are sometimes unable to see eye to eye or unable to come to a common consensus of what the actual goal is. So I'd love to hear your take on the role of empathy, compassion, but also sharing one's story as it pertains to politics and civic engagement.
I recently interviewed a young teacher named Christina Rojas. She is a speech pathologist. And what she said is one of the worries she has about the proliferation of devices is that it's made us stop talking to each other, that it's the act of conversation that connects us. So, to your point about empathy, part of our responsibility is that we've got to be in space with each other. Texting is not the same. We've all had a text where we misread what the emoji meant or what the period should have said, and fights were started.
Right.
So our first job for empathy is the connection. We've got to be in space with one another. And that is something I think is harder and harder for each generation. But when we do it, it changes things. It's the reason when we have these mass events, people show up, they want to be in human contact. And that gets to your point about compassion. It is hard to feel compassion when you don't feel connection. And so by being in spaces, showing up, volunteering, that's how we create that. And when you get to the political piece, telling your story is important, but asking for another person's story is even more important. We spend a lot of time in conversation waiting for our turn,
Mm, yep.
as opposed to, or it's as opposed to asking people for their lessons.
Absolutely.
If you want people to believe you are there to serve them, they have to believe you can hear them. And you can't hear them if you're talking.
Right. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And really to close us out, you mentioned this earlier about the gerrymandering in Texas right now. So I'm Houston, Texas, born and raised, right? I went off to Harvard and I was able to pursue my degrees there. And even there, I was actually present when the administration was waging attacks against Harvard, when they were trying to ban Harvard from enrolling international students. And I'm talking to my international friends and roommates who are saying this is hitting so close to home. I've seen the ramifications and the consequences of this administration up close and through, like you mentioned, the stories of people. And as I'm looking right now in Texas and I'm looking at the attacks on voting rights, I'm looking at gerrymandering to dilute certain demographics of people's voting power. As I'm watching the Supreme Court take an axe to various sections of the VRA, the Voting Rights Act, Shelby v. Holder at Section 5, now Louisiana v. Cale in Section 2. I'm watching this stuff happen. And I just want to know, and so do so many people who are here in Texas, how can we apply some of the things that you've talked about, some of the work that you've done as it pertains to protecting the vote? How can we apply that here in Texas and across the country?
So I spent a year at the University of Texas at Austin. Uh, I was a Longhorn, and part of what I understand about Texas is Texas is like five countries in one.
Right.
Like you got the Empire of Houston,
Right.
you got the Dominion of Dallas. You got a lot of stuff happening there. But what binds Texas together in theory, and if we do it in practice,
Mhm.
is the belief that people should have the right to their freedoms and their power. But if they've never seen freedom, if they've never felt power, it's hard to fight for it. You can't fight for things in the abstract. You and I've heard our family say, you can't be what you can't see.
Right. Talk about it. Yeah.
And so part of our responsibility, it's what we did in Georgia, it's what you can do in Texas, is what people are doing in Texas through the Texas Organizing Project, through Power to the People. But it's got to be everyone everywhere thinking about this. And here's the thing: we can't say go vote if we don't show up to help. When I ran for governor the first time, what I sent my whole team out to do before we asked for a single vote, I had them knock on doors and ask, how can I help? What do you need? Right now, across this country, we are trying to win elections. That's not the goal. We need to win people. We need to win their trust. We need to win their faith, and we need to win their service. And that begins by asking, what do you need? And so what I would say in Texas, it's what we did when we were registering voters here in Georgia, we started by going to them, not asking them to come to us. We knocked on their doors. And then we knocked and we said, when they answered, who else is in your house? So we could talk to
Yeah,
them. We did that for the census work that we did through Fair Count. We did that through the work with Fair Fight on voter protection. We've got to show up where people are. We can't wait for them to come to us because they don't believe anyone's there to help them when they get there. And so when we show up, when we show that democracy can deliver, that we will deliver, that's when people start to believe that maybe voting is important. Our job is to intersect their sense of power with our sense of community to get to our collective sense of possibility.
absolutely. Absolutely. And hopefully we can make all of these aspirations and dreams become a reality for the people in America if we continue to have these conversations, continue to talk about the things that are important and advocate for what's right. So thank you so much for
Thank
joining me. Again, I am like I can't believe I'm really on Zoom with the Stacey Abrams, but thank you so much. And I just look forward to all the work we're going to be able to do in the future. So
Likewise, although I say one thing,
mhm.
it's not work that we're going to do, it's work you're doing.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah,
So
yes,
we need to
ma'am.
claim what we're getting done because what they were able to do in Texas, what they're doing right now in Missouri, what we saw happen in Chicago, we've got to also give ourselves credit.
Mhm.
That's where progress comes in.
Yeah,
We may not get everything all at once, but we can all get something somewhere soon, and that's the work we got to keep doing.
absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.